Good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Craft Compliance, Preparing to License Your Craft Beverage Production Business, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation about the steps that pre-launch craft beverage producers need to take before setting in on the license process. So my name is Chris Van Orden. I'm the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia Small Business Development Center at George Mason University. The craft beverage program is designed to provide industry-specific assistance to Virginia's craft beverage sector. So today's program will be a free-flowing conversation on what breweries, wineries, cideries, and distilleries need to work through before registering with federal and state regulators. You can enter any questions you have in the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer them during or after the webinar. Again, please use the Q&A function. It's just easier on our end. So I am excited to welcome back Kevin Anderson, who is Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at alcoholconsulting.com and Executive Director of the Loudoun County Brewers Association. As a former Virginia Alcohol Beverage Control Authority Special Agent, Kevin spent years on the lookout for regulatory violations. Today, he works with alcohol producers around Virginia and across the country on a variety of regulatory issues, and we're really appreciative of him lending his expertise here today. So I'll be asking him to give us a rundown on the many issues that founders need to be aware of when they decide that they're going to open a production business. Welcome back, Kevin.
Hey, Chris, thanks again for having me. And also thank you to the Virginia SBDC. I think this is my third time or something like that, and they've been great. I've really enjoyed these.
Third or fourth, I couldn't tell you.
Something like that.
Take all of the expertise that you're willing to share with our audience. So thank you for being here. So we can dig right in. So we can kind of start out saying that we have a founder who is committed to opening a production business of some sort, right? Alcohol producer. We're not going for anything crazy or specifically oddball models, whatever that is, the craft beverage production business. But they haven't taken any firm steps yet, right? They have an idea. They know that they want to do this. What would you suggest be the very first thing that they do?
Yeah, this is the number one question we get. I get on a daily basis. I even got this morning before this call. What do I do first? Do you set up your LLC or corporation? Do you hire employees? But generally, I would say craft your business plan. And you might be surprised how many businesses don't actually have a true business plan. They think this is a passion and they just want to have it their passion and do it. But sometimes it is a business. So having a real business plan set in place with your costs and all of that, it's very important. This business plan should summarize the essence of what your end goal is and what you want to achieve. That's always my question to a new client and to a new business coming on to our association. What is your end goal? Where do you want to be? Because you need to start setting yourself up at the beginning for your end goal, because you might end up in a location that's too small, or you might sold yourself short and not gotten the benefits out of the new self-distribution that's coming into Virginia for the brewery market. Also map out, are you going to look into distribution? Distribution has gotten more difficult over the years and gotten more cutthroat. Are you just going to have a tasting room? Direct-to-consumer shipping, state-by-state regulations. So there's all these things that you need to map out and plan out of where you're going to go with your business and where do you start. You can even sell online. Even there's retail licenses that allow you in Virginia to sell online wine and beer. But lately, the trend is not necessarily about just starting a winery, just starting a brewery, or just starting a distillery. I see a lot of new and current businesses integrating multiple commodities under one roof. And really what that means is, I'm starting a brewery, but I'm also adding a distillery or a winery or a liquor license restaurant to my business. It could be under the same roof, or it could be on the same piece of property, such as a farm. I've seen this as now an all-inclusive approach, as a game changer, offering products for every customer and every taste. So not only new businesses we see coming up have multiple licenses, but existing ones. So you have existing wineries adding brewery license, breweries adding restaurant and distillery licenses. So think of that. Don't short sell yourself when you're starting, because the tasting room truly is where the money is made for your business. Next would really be location. Locations are something that you can think about at the very beginning. Getting a general idea of where you want to be. Are you trying to be in a warehouse or industrial complex? Do you want to be on agriculturally zoned land or a farm or a strip mall? And to be quite frank, I think your location is the key to, and many times, determining success. Not necessarily the quality of your product all the time, as a lot of you can probably see if you've been around the area going to local wineries, breweries, and distilleries. They might not always have the best beer, but they're always packed and they always have people. Then let's figure out why that is. Why are they being able to have all of those people come to their business if their beer is not the best beer in the area? So, these are all things that your market analysis then can look at. Go in, do it yourself, hire a third party, understand your niche and your target audience, even at a local level. If you're going to be on the side of 95 in a strip mall, well, which side of 95 do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of 95 when people are going home from happy hour or going home from work? Or do you want to be on the northbound? These are all little things to think about, because location does matter. So really, it's investing the time and resources at the front before you even start the business to see if this is a path that's viable. And understanding, I think, is number one.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I'm happy to hear you say all of those things, Kevin. A lot of those are things that the SBDCs we support on, right? So your local centers, if you've never written a business plan, that is very much in the wheelhouse of the SBDCs. We can make sure you have the tools necessary, help you to understand the different financial documents. It's certainly the case if you have to raise money, but even for your own purposes, making sure that you know exactly what your strategy is going to be. It forces you to think out into the future. And maybe if you have more than one person involved early on, it can help to clarify if there's any discrepancies in what your plans are. One of you is thinking that you're going to be, statewide distribution. One of you thinks you're going to be tasting room only. It's a very different business. So really helpful to make sure that you have a good vision for this company before you start lining up resources, filing permits, those kinds of things. That's great. So let's say somebody has gone through those steps, right? They said, okay, I've written my business plan, or at least started in on it. I know generally where I want to be location wise. I've done either work with the SBDCs or brought in some outside folks, or I have some way to demonstrate that there's demand in this market, that I can be successful here, doing that market analysis, knowing that there is a pathway to success. What would you say are some of those business fundamentals then that you'd recommend a founder kind of get lined up early on?
Yeah, I mean, first off, a founder, once you starting to get serious and you know that this plan is moving forward, start to safeguard yourself. You and everybody else in the business that's coming together, because we see a lot of times it's not just one individual, it might be a group of friends. And there's nothing worse than friends or family doing business together and something happens. I've actually seen this numerous times in just the state of Virginia alone, where people, friends, good friends from college enter into business. They didn't set up their LLC or corporation correctly. They didn't have what their best interests personally at heart. Maybe they should have gotten attorneys when looking into this, and now they're no longer friends. So really setting up and safeguarding yourselves individually as you're coming together, whether it's a partnership. So you have an LLC or corporation, which are the ones that usually hold these licenses. And that's the type of business that we see most that people start. I don't really see general partnerships or sole proprietors, mainly because of the liability purposes. But you can do these yourself. You can hire an attorney. Obviously, I would always recommend hiring an attorney when going into some type of business like this. But while it's the safe choice, it's not always in the budget. So, you can hire an attorney to do this. You can hire sometimes other third parties, and there's even do-it-yourself online templates that can help with all of the setup of your bylaws and or operating agreement, which basically sets up the internal workings of your company. Really, that's one of the first steps that I see people taking. When you're starting to bring on other founders or friends, possibly some other agreements that your attorney could recommend, like, are non-competes something that can be done? I know they've been phasing out, in the Federal Trade Commission hasn't been really allowing those as much, but that is great, something to tell your attorney. Is that even a possibility? Or just, you have trade secrets that you're trying to keep, internal, and making sure that other people don't know, and other documents that they might need. So safeguard yourself, safeguard the business starting off. Then you also have to think about intellectual property. So really, your logo, your brand, your design, while that doesn't have to be something right in the beginning, the forefront, obviously, if your brand hinges on that, where you have something distinctive like a logo or a concept, maybe you need to hire an attorney who specializes in the alcohol industry and doing trademarks, even a patent. I've seen some people have interesting ways to produce and to age, bourbons and whiskeys, create beer, remove alcohol from wine. So there's these things that also might be able to be patented. So, getting an attorney and a team on that too, because not always is your attorney for your business the same attorney for your other management of your business as well. So sometimes it could be multiple. One of the most important questions, which I will always say, is your space in your building is very important. What is, making sure that you've looked at all the options, looking for what you need, what you can afford, and really what your plan has. So that's another very important step and a fundamental that you need to really look at, because I've seen some amazing business models that have great product and they're out of business just based on where they were located. You also have equipment logistics. Equipment, if you're going to start a production business, can be very expensive. You'd look at some of the distilleries in Virginia, and their equipment runs over $1 million for some of these stills. So you need to think, are you buying this brand new? Are you building it to your exact specs? But there's also a lot of used equipment on the market. So, look at safeguarding yourself when you're looking at this. You're going to have to get loans and some other things. But one of the big things also is talking to other local businesses. The craft industry is a community. If you want to start a distillery, visit your local distilleries, talk to the owners, ask questions. If you want to start a brewery, go to a brewery, and so on. The industry is very friendly. They're always willing to help. I always kind of broker sit down. So I have some other clients or friends that own wineries, breweries, and distilleries. Then we have some new businesses that want to come up, and they're asking these questions. So just last week, I brokered a sit down with a business that is a restaurant, distillery, and brewery, and then with the ownership of a new brewery, winery, and restaurant business. And they sat and they had some beers and they just talked. What did they talk about? Their whole startup process. What zoning issues did they run through? How zoning took them 6 months to get some special use permits. And also, one of the key is, what would they have done differently? That is one of the key questions when you're going into talking to these owners and trying their products. What is the 1 or 2 things you would have done differently when you first started and as you've grown the business? So that's very important, is get out there and talk, because honestly, when I see a brewery all of a sudden pop up, or a winery, and really no one knows who they are, then that usually means they haven't reached out to the local community. And reach out to your local breweries, wineries, and distilleries, because they are here. They are a family.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? You're going into an ecosystem, there's always going to be things that you can't expect, but certainly, who else is in the marketplace. You need to know where you stand relative to other people. It's there's a lot of ways to kind of create some bad blood if you're just drop in and you're not getting the benefit of learning from their mistakes.
Yeah.
So I liked a lot of the things you said. It made me think of kind of it boils down to, right, management of risk. So some of those things, right, protecting yourself, making sure you have agreements in place so that you're not personally liable for things. Things like business banking accounts, disaggregating your financials, and then the alignment of resources, right? So there's the risk management and resource alignment, where, okay, what's the model that we want here? What are our equipment logistics? What are our timelines? What's going to be our burn rate of our capital? Those kinds of things, right? Those are the two different things to manage, and you can get really far down the line without taking a hard look at some of these things. And I feel like people go awry if they don't dedicate some good front end legwork to these kinds of issues.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So let's say a company makes it through those stages. They've set up some type of corporate structure, even just an LLC to start, just so they can start conducting business. They have maybe a general identity. What would you advise a founder to begin to move on then?
So at this point, you're probably either you found your location or you're picking between a couple locations. You might have had an attorney now. You might have been talking with landlords, going through leases. Is it something that you want to buy? Are you leasing a space? Are you going to buy the space? Not just in Virginia, but across the country, the issue that I see the most is local zoning issues, local zoning regulations prohibiting certain businesses in certain areas. So if the address or the physical space you are looking to go into is not zoned for what you want to do, and that's generally like something by right. By right means you can just go in there, you can get your permits, and you're already allowed to do that. But in many cases, you might have to have some type of special use permit, which the application, the process going through a local either board of supervisors, town or city can take months and months and months. So make sure your location is zoned for what you want to do, and if it's not, look at what is the process to be able to do what you want to do on that property, even if zoning is not there, because it can sometimes be changed. So location is extremely important. Also, when it's beginning to start the licensing process for your state and federal alcohol licenses. So one thing is you can't even start applying until you know where you're going to be, because that address on that application is extremely important. That address can't change. If you want to move your business a couple years down the road, you have to apply all over again from scratch. So it's important that your address is very specific. It has your suite number or building number, or be very specific. And I see issues a lot on agriculturally zoned land or farmland where after the application process, the applicant goes to the locality and actually changes their physical address because they want to change it to maybe a name that actually is their brewery or winery name. That's not always an issue, but because it might be the same physical location, but it can cause some issues. So you need to know for your licensing process, is this your final address? And if it's not, let's figure that out before you apply, because you can't apply until you know where you're going to be. And also, you shouldn't apply until you actually have right to that space, meaning you actually have a lease agreement or a deed, meaning you have the right to be there at that space. In the context also of just Virginia specifically, Virginia does have a 30-day objection period for every alcohol license. So whether it's an internet retailer's license, a convenience store, winery, brewery, distillery, wholesaler, when you apply, there's a 30-day period in which you have to publish in the newspaper. You also have to post a document on the front of the business stating that you've applied for a license. This does allow people to object to the issuance of your license. So I would then say that one of the number one things is once you have right to your space, start your application process immediately, making sure that you can get through that period with you and the local community with no issues. And just because an issue comes up does not mean you're not going to get licensed. But there is that process. So being able to map out your time frame in your business plan. Okay, well, this is how long it should take us to apply. This is the standard time frame for our federal applications. Right now, you're probably looking between 50 to 70 days for some federal applications. So being able to put that in your business plan and knowing, okay, well, we're behind. We need to apply because we have an opening that we are planning on, November 15th, and we're not ready because we haven't even applied yet. So all these things should be mapped out in your business plan before you even get started, or they can obviously be updated along the way. But corporate structure, your location, zoning, and then that's when you can essentially start your licensing process. So all that before you even start, really.
Yeah, I know people think, okay, I'm going to start applying for permits. There's a lot of things that need to be in place before then. And if somebody does get ahead of themselves, let's say they file that TTB permit for operations, then they don't have site control. I mean, I feel like you can get caught in limbo for a while because they're not going to take the time to hunt you down and explain the steps that you got.
I am seeing this as more of an issue now. So, I do lots of licensing all over the country, wineries, breweries, and distilleries. So that's the same at the federal level. The licensing process at the federal level is the exact same from state to state. But I see that as an issue all the time where people have applied to the feds, to TTB, before they've even put their building up. And all of a sudden, TTB comes back in 14 or 30 days saying, oh, I just happen to be ready to review your application. It looks good, or you might have some corrections. We're ready to issue your license. And then they'll tell you, okay, well, are you ready to open? Because we're only holding your application open for 15 days. And if your building's not going to be up for 6 more months, they're going to actually withdraw your application, and you're going to have to then resubmit it a little bit closer to time. In the past, that wasn't as much of an issue as what I've heard, but I do see that now. There even has been a couple circumstances where I've even seen a TTB investigator physically go out and set a time to visit the location to make sure what was on site is what was submitted to TTB. So yes, it is important that you can submit too early. And it is sometimes a timing game of when can you submit versus local regulations and if you want to open. Sometimes it doesn't always work out, but I don't think I've ever seen somebody ever open on time. So, everyone's usually a little bit late from their opening date.
That's a good takeaway for the day. It always takes longer than you expect. Be patient.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you're not cutting it too close in terms of your resources or making promises that you can't fulfill. So very good point. We had 2 questions that are not quite in line, but I figure we can answer them right now. Parag asked, does the certification on beer making programs help in getting loans? I'm not sure which certification that would be. There are a number of certification programs. Some are on the production side. Others are more on the business side. They're all going to have different backgrounds. I would say having a strong business plan is really a fundamental piece of going and raising capital. The SBDCs, that is a big part of what we do at our regional offices, is to help you to go attract capital when you're kind of at that proper stage. And I will say you definitely need a business plan if you're going to certainly go out and get loans. Even if you're raising capital from friends and family, you should have something in place. And if you look back at the Craft Beverage Assistance page, there's a number of webinars with bankers who specialize in working with this community. So please do take a look. It's a pretty honest take on what lenders are looking for when they're evaluating deals and potential deals. So definitely worth looking at there. And then there was a question about somebody produces a sangria and is asking about bottling and selling it. That I think that would be a question, something of license type, right? Determining if you're actually be making the wine or if you're just going to be blending it. This is getting into some of the less popular licensing or maybe like lesser known license types. You're not a winery.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, really the biggest trend now is not necessarily even a brick and mortar business. It is being a brand owner. It's owning a brand and outsourcing everything, outsourcing your packaging, outsourcing your production. But sangria can fall into different categories depending on, you could have distilled spirit type of RTD cocktail. That is a sangria cocktail, but it's distilled spirit based. So that would be a distillery license. There's also, a lot of times you'll have sangria as a wine. Sangria then can be made as an other than standard wine product as well under a winery license. You can also fortify it under a winery license. Then you have restaurants which can't produce alcohol, but certain regulations allow them to actually make their own sangria by buying liquor from the ABC store like they normally do, and then buying the wine from their wine wholesalers like they normally do, then mixing it in-house. So you're not really producing it. That's just a retailer being able to do that. So there's all these different levels of really what you want to do with sangria. So,
and I mean, especially the restaurants, I feel like you saw people getting creative during the pandemic with the ability
Yeah.
for packaged containers to go. This is getting into very both niche areas and also maybe a little less certain because those were temporary regulations. And it's, I don't know, Kevin, if you have any insights into some of these things, where we've settled on the ability to carry out mixed products out of a restaurant setting. But
Yeah, I mean, which they basically have allowed. I think it's been approved for a couple more years. Which if it's not, it'll probably end up being permanent. But there's also a food component to that. You can't just go to your local restaurant in Virginia and buy 2 margaritas to go. You actually have to order meals too. So it's a similar idea, but you have to buy meals. So the only people that can sell to go like distilled spirits would be a distillery can do that, but they're considered a manufacturer, which
Right.
will have a lot more complications when you're a distillery. It's probably the most difficult license to apply for, to get, and to maintain, just because the compliance is really on another level in comparison to wineries and breweries.
Yeah. So if somebody decides that they want to make sangria without incurring all of the costs of the overhead of actually establishing a physical plant, you can have contract production, work with somebody who holds that license. They produce it on your behalf. You are the brand owner at that point. Maybe you're just licensing out sort of the IP and the brand, and you manage some of that. You may not ever take possession of the product. There's all kinds of ways to work this. It's always going to be a balance of, how much burden that you're shouldering and how much margin you're going to keep. I know people who have built brands starting out as contract production, then brought it in-house once they built that brand up to a certain level. Make sure you know all of the costs that you're going to be incurring, that you're going to be fully compliant, and whatever it is, you have really strong contract language in place with whatever partners you line up. If you have a contract producer who's making this for you, very, very clear on your terms, making sure that your product is going to be available when you need it, and that they're not going to be able to turn around and make a competing product based on your recipe. Essentially, there's lots and lots of steps there. I feel like that's a very interesting space that's moving quickly. Antoinette, we just answered your question. This will be recorded, so you can come back and listen to the thing there. But I want to make sure we are able to cover everything we did today. But thank you for that question about some of the lesser known kind of structures that people pursue. All right, so Kevin, we talked about it a little bit, but I think it'd be helpful to hammer home some of these points. What steps do you find that founders think they need to complete earlier than is actually necessary?
It's all the little details. So when I'm talking to new ownership groups, new founders, a lot of times they're really hung up on the branding of the business before the business has even started. How many times have you gone on social media and see, a brewery, wine, or distillery that's coming soon, and they're coming soon for 3 years? They already have logos, they have all this stuff, they have a website up, and they haven't even found a location yet. There's a lot of people which is great. Everyone wants all that. They want a great brand. They want a strong brand that's going to resonate with their customers, their community. But that can be done simultaneously or even later on. It's spending too much resources on that stuff. And then it's like, what's the point if we can't even get licensed? So making sure that we prioritize. That's what a good business plan does too. Don't spend $10,000 on branding before you've even found a location. But that's different unless maybe you do contract brewing before then, or contract winemaking for your brand. But everything is different, but just don't sweat the small things like that at the beginning, because it can all be done in time. So that's really where I see that the hang up is the important stuff isn't being done, like zoning, locations, lease agreements, equipment. There's a lot of other things just besides, the color of a website, which I think needs to be done first.
Yeah, it's the less exciting part of the business, although certainly very critical to the actual functioning of a production business. But the outward facing things, right? You can decide how much you want to build into that, how important it is to your model, and obviously safeguarding IP. If you're going to have a website, you can lock it up, but mounting a $20,000 marketing campaign before you have selected your site, that's getting ahead of yourself, right? That's a lot of resources tied up that need to be dedicated to more firm
Mhm.
steps along the way.
Yep.
So we have another question, but I think we can ask that at the end here. So we've talked so far about different production businesses, right? You have licenses in general, and with the kind of asterisks for some of these,
Mhm.
more specialized licenses, but breweries, wineries, and distilleries are the three general categories that we're in. Can you walk through some of the key differences between the pre-licensing processes for these different categories?
Yeah, I mean, you'll have two main processes in the state of Virginia. You have the federal process, which is TTB, and then you have the state process, which is Virginia ABC. While the basic process is very much similar, there are differences. Breweries and wineries are more similar in their federal and state licensing process. Distilleries are kind of their own animal, really. But yeah, they're definitely not the exact same. And one thing is for distilleries in Virginia directly, they are much more intricate, the application process. There's also heightened qualifications and ongoing requirements to keep up with at both the federal and state level. Just in Virginia, you also have to get a secondary license to be able to sell tastings and bottles on site. It's called a Virginia ABC distillery store, and that allows your distillery to actually be an ABC store. So it's much more complicated in Virginia than it is in other states. At the federal level, you'll have a lot of questions. So the federal applications are much more in depth. They have a lot of questions. They want you to describe the buildings, the dimensions, describe the property. Wineries and breweries are much more simple. Distilleries are definitely more in depth. Even for distillery licenses, they want to know what is your process to produce some of the products that you're going to make. They want to make sure that you're applying for the correct license, that you maybe have a general idea of what you're going to be doing, while the brewery and winery licenses really don't get into that as much. The winery licensing at the federal level does ask, what type of products do you plan on making, and up to what alcohol percentage. And that's partially probably for tax purposes, because tax rates for wine vary depending on the alcohol content as well. One of the big facets, though, to be aware of is the scrutiny that businesses go under during the application process. So when you're applying, you apply generally under an LLC or corporation, and then all of those business documents have to be disclosed. So your operating agreements, your bylaws, and they go down that path of your ownership. If it's owned by other companies, if it's owned by trusts, then it's owned by individuals. Both the state and the feds review your entire ownership structure, and they're looking for the final individual people, because those are the people that either have to provide background checks, their personal data and information. And even for Virginia, they even require you to provide a copy of your driving transcript and your driving record. So this is basically an in-depth interview of your ownership structure, and you'll find owners and even investors now in the spotlight, just going through and putting all their personal information down. I've seen that as a point of contention. Maybe there's nothing wrong with somebody's criminal history, or there's nothing wrong with what their past. They're just an investor. They have some ownership. They just don't want to be disclosed. And those are things during your business planning process you might need to figure out, because I've seen it where investors have spent money and now they are having to be disclosed and provide all of their social security number and mother's maiden name and all of this stuff for their background check. And they're trying to avoid that. And by going through all those corporate documents, they're going to find it, and they're going to make sure that everyone's fully disclosed. So that's definitely something that I would look at, and making sure that all of your ownership and all the investors, depending on what you and your attorneys or team have come up with as your ownership structure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Certainly that's part of the pre-licensing. Once you've set in on that,
Yeah,
if you've accepted some money from somebody, we're not talking about somebody who's operating at more than one tier in the 3-tier system, for instance. We're not talking about violation type things, but
yeah,
somebody who's
just
maybe doesn't want to be known that they're also investing.
investor. It's very common when
Yeah.
you are having a big investor groups. because they could be just an investor in some other state that they hardly know what they've invested in at this point, and they're not trying to be just disclosed to all these states and have all their personal information just out there for the world. That's 9 times out of 10 just the reason. They just want to invest and they don't want to have their name attached into a system with all of this stuff. But sometimes there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, no kidding. One other question I wanted to ask before we start talking about kind of beginning the process of engaging the regulators. In Virginia in particular, right, there are some licenses that are different within the different producer categories. I'm thinking in particular of your farm wineries and your limited breweries. Are there any special pre-licensing things that those companies might need to do before they start the licensing process?
Yeah, so limited breweries and limited distilleries. So that means basically they're on land zone agricultural, or they have permission, written permission from the locality to have a limited brewery or limited distillery on non-agriculturally zoned land. So that's one of the things that you would need to look at. Distilleries are also more complicated. Actually, can you repeat the question real quick?
Just asking about the sort of pre-licensing steps for these.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
So the licensing steps, mainly it has to do with what you're growing, because a limited license has to be, you have to grow something. So a limited license for a limited brewery, a limited distillery, you have to grow something on your property that you actually put into your product. There's no minimum requirement. Theoretically, having a hops plant or a couple hops plants on your property planted near your tasting room qualifies. Same thing with your distillery. Yes, you could. It would be great if you could have 100 acres of corn and you could have barley and wheat and all the stuff that you're producing with your distillery, but it is not a requirement to have a minimum acreage for your limited brewery and limited distillery. Limited or farm wineries have changed. That just changed on July 1st of this year, and the licensing is very different than it used to be. So now there's 4 types of licenses for farm wineries, and they all have very different pre-licensing requirements. And the biggest one is how much land, how much acreage you have, and how much is, and also what it's planted. You know, do you have 3 acres of planted either grapes or apples? Do you have 10 acres of that? And also some of these new licenses now will have minimum production requirements. It could be 4,500 liters per year for one of the licenses. So when you're talking about pre-licensing requirements in Virginia, limited distilleries, limited breweries are easier because the code just states that you have to grow something on your property that you use in your product. No minimum. Minimum could be coming, but obviously we always suggest be a farm, have the most product you can so you can grow it on site. Even though it's not a requirement, farm wineries though are different. That's really a different conversation. We could do a whole hour now of all the different farm winery types. They have a class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, plus a commercial winery license. So just look at those if you're going to be on any type of agriculturally zoned land, which is also farmland, is you could have some production, some minimum production and or agricultural growing requirements.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll set that up for a later date, but yeah, I appreciate you addressing it. Right. There's plenty of people who might be tuning in today thinking of this license type, you know, some of these categories. It's not just making sure that you have the properly zoned land, but in the case of wineries, how much are you able to grow? How much do you plan to produce? Making sure you're going after setting yourself up, right? It's certainly going to have an impact on your business plan and your costs and your production scale, how much acreage you're going to have. So, because
before you get licensed in Virginia, one of the final steps is your local Virginia ABC agent coming on site and doing a walkthrough and an inspection of the property, making sure that it is exactly what you said it was on your application, which includes the diagram of the premise. So they're going to be there. They're going to look at the land. They're going to look at your crops and making sure you actually have something planted or growing. And also, many cases you can have some off-site land too in Virginia, and that can be included in some cases as part of your land and your property. So,
yeah, it has its appeal. Certainly, some of those license types, but it does involve some additional steps. So make sure you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So let's say, again, a company makes it this far and they want to start engaging with regulators, maybe not yet at the point of filing that paperwork, but maybe they're starting to get some concrete questions in place. What elements do you like to see in place before a producer begins speaking with regulators? What things might still be in progress? As a former regulator, I'm sure you get a lot of phone calls from people at various stages.
Yeah, I mean, starting the conversation with regulators, whether it's federal or state alcohol regulators, local regulators, health department, VDACS, which is the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. It's never too early to start, and obviously can be very beneficial. Especially while certain aspects of your business plan are evolving. You want to be able to get these clear-cut answers so you know how to form a proper business plan. So sometimes you need these answers, but it's not always from the regulators. There's also other places that you can get good information. There's attorneys, there's consultants, there's other businesses in the same community that are doing exactly what you do. And if you can talk to your regulator, you talk to all these other people, and then you can kind of draw some conclusions sometimes that this is the answer. Because I hate to say it, it's the answers from people aren't always clear cut. From my experience as a former regulator, I can vouch that they typically don't like hypothetical questions. And a lot of times they won't answer them. They want a clear cut question with a clear defined purpose and facts, because they don't want to give out inaccurate information and having any misrepresentations down the road, because it has happened. I've seen regulators actually put something in writing that was actually incorrect. This location did that for a while, but a new agent then came in the area, and when they did their inspection, they said, "Oh, you can't do this." Well, luckily they did keep that written authorization essentially prior that said they can, but then they had to stop doing it and change. So make sure that you're going to have to surround yourself with people that know what they're doing. And that is including the regulators. Like, what is the minimum requirement to have a commercial kitchen if you wanted to add that to your winery, brewery, distillery? Is it even allowed? For instance, so if you wanted, in some cases, I've seen this where someone was misinformed that a business that has a winery, brewery, and distillery all together in Virginia is permissible, which it is. You can have a winery, brewery, distillery tasting room all together, and then have the liquor, the beer and wine consumption all within that same space commingled. But what people don't realize is when the distillery part, if the liquor is commingled, then all of the beverages have a maximum ounce restriction. So if you've gone to wineries and breweries in Virginia, you can go up, you can get a glass of wine, you can get beer to go. Sometimes you can even get, pitchers and pints. But if you have a shared distillery tasting room, you can't do that. So that really limits yourself. If you go out to some locations that also have a distillery and a winery or brewery, you'll probably notice that they have a common winery and brewery tasting room, but their distillery tasting room is separate and usually in a different building, and it has 4 walls around it. So the distillery tasting room is separate, and that allows your wine and your beer consumption to not have that ounce limit restriction. And sometimes you don't know that unless you really dive into the details of what you're trying to do. We want to be on a farm and offer beer, wine, and liquor. Well, I mean, that's awesome. A lot of people are doing that, but how do we get there? So business plan, you have lots of zoning issues now when it comes to that, and making sure that you can get all the facts. So yes, going to your regulators is important. So it's not just alcohol. You have local business licensing. You'll have sales and use tax to apply for, zoning, other building permits. So yes, getting these conversations out of the way, letting them know you're coming to town definitely helps. And there's a lot of other consultants that I've worked with over my time that do certain things with septic, that look at wells and you're just the building and local regulations to help with the construction. So there's so many people in Virginia that can help with your craft beverage business that it's really great. And being also here with the SBDC, giving out free training. So it's never too soon to talk to regulators and talk to people so you can set your business plan properly.
Yeah, I really like your point about the specificity being not just, oh, I have an idea for something can I do, right? There's
I see it
too
all
many
the time.
nuances.
It's like, oh, I want to have an alcoholic ice cream brand. Well, there's so many nuances that go into that idea of alcoholic ice cream. Is it
Mhm.
what type of product? Is it a malt beverage? Is it a liquor? Is it a spirit product? Now, what alcohol percentage is it? Because in Virginia, distilled spirit products under a certain alcohol percentage can actually be treated and sold like wine. So there's a lot of things to know before that, you really dive into it. So getting those answers during your building process of your business are very important.
Yeah. So I think you're right. Having a good sense of what you want to accomplish, talking with your regulators, asking specific questions, but having done your due diligence. But at the same time, I have to imagine that, Kevin, you did not like being blindsided when somebody comes with a fully baked thing that's wrong in many ways. And, regulators do not like being surprised about things. They'd rather you ask, make sure that they're doing it the right way rather than, you know, waltzing in with a very complex thing that
Yeah.
relies on a lot of misinterpretations.
And if you can, get it in writing and always follow up a call. So if you're talking to a regulator about something, try to get there and they don't, for some reason, email you that information or put it in writing, follow up with them with a written email saying, it was great talking to you. Thanks for our conversation that you explained how this local zoning does not apply to us and that we can move forward with this licensing. Because making sure that you always keep that, because sometimes misinformation is given out and you want to make sure you protect yourself.
Yeah, there's a great point. This is all, a lot of this stuff comes down to interpretation. So capturing that, making sure you have it on hand as you start the licensing, if somebody advises you that this license type is right for you and that it will work in this location, once you start that process, it's hard to throw the brakes. So making sure you have it on the record. One last question that came in, and this is a pretty broad question that I feel like
Okay.
might be something we can address in a future session about the licensing side. Assuming I had the land and money, what is the typical cost for covering the necessary licenses for a small, like a microbrewery, a small craft brewery, and the typical time required?
I mean, doing it yourself, if you don't hire an attorney, you don't hire anyone, you just handle it yourself. I mean, the cost mainly is your time. The licensing fees in the state of Virginia are extremely reasonable in comparison to many other states. I think off the top of my head, a basic limited brewery license, a yearly fee, I think is $380. You'll have some other fees. You'll have to publish some public notices in the newspaper. You're going to have a simple application fee. I mean, you can be there, and there's no federal fees. So there's no federal application fee. So doing it yourself, just with the licensing aspect, you can do it with under $1,000. Then you'll have an annual state renewal for all the different licensing types that you have. Time frames, it depends on partially the locality. Every time that I've done this, it's never been, none of my clients or even none of my association members have really ever been waiting on a federal or state alcohol license to be issued. Most of the time, it's actually waiting on the building, funding to be finalized, and all these other things. But yeah, I mean, you could theoretically probably get licensed if you're ready with a building and you have equipment on site. It's possible within 90 days, not knowing if your local zoning has any other issues, but just strictly alcohol wise, it is possible to be licensed in just a couple months.
Is it fair to say, I feel like the licensing processes have gotten smoother, right? That people have scaled up some of their time to, some of the regulators have got more
Yeah,
people on
definitely.
staff, approve licenses more quickly, but that's only one part of the equation. And again, that's all doing it yourself. It can be very affordable. Making sure that you have all the information you need to do it correctly is important too. So even if you bring somebody else in just to eyeball your work, make sure you haven't missed any important steps. It might be important. And then, you might, who knows, every company's different. There's going to be one snag. It might be the fire marshal is giving you a hard time. It might be you have a fight with the town septic plant about your wastewater, like, and your effluent. It might be whatever, right? And contractors, like, all these things still take a while, but the licensing side is a vital but step, but not the whole story.
Yep,
So,
I agree.
Well, Kevin, I know we are getting close to the end of our hour. I wanted to see if you had any last words that you might want to share with our audience about the steps, kind of the pre-licensing side. I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about the licensing process, but any thoughts that you have about companies that are going from idea to actually looking to implement their business plan?
Yeah, I mean, have a business plan. I feel like I've come from so many different aspects of this industry, not only being a regulator, now being a part of association. I've actually then been a part of alcohol licenses myself. Once a liquor store license in a different state, also an import and wholesale business. So I've done some of those to see what this journey actually looks like for clients and people I work with. When I was going through the process to get an out-of-state liquor license, I actually hired my own attorney in that state to do it because they were the expert at that time in that location. That I know what I don't know, and that's, I think, the most important thing is that just because I might do this for a living, but I know that in that area I just don't want to deal with it, and I would rather this attorney or this other expert actually do it for me, even though it's what I do. But my real parting advice is don't underestimate the importance of research and planning. Knowing what you can and cannot do, there's nothing worse than creating a business plan, even getting licensed and realizing, oh, I thought this license would allow us to have off-site license locations anywhere we wanted to. And maybe that's not the case. And that was a big part of your business plan. So importance, research and planning, getting those answers and getting those long-term answers. What's your long-term goal, and seeing if what you're doing now even allows for that. Just remember, you can't, produce or serve alcohol if you don't have a license. So, staying dedicated to compliance and prioritizing, all of the regulatory requirements, because you're going to have ongoing state reports to submit, ongoing federal reports. So just make sure that, research, planning, and surrounding yourself with the proper people to get your business off the ground.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, as always, really appreciate your time and expertise here. I'm sure our audience really learned a lot from what you had to share. So thank you all for tuning in. We will share details about our next webinar. But for now, Kevin, please join me in thanking Kevin for his time today.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
This was very informative. And thank everyone here for attending today. You will receive an email with a link to this recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we hope to see you all at our next session. Take care, everyone. Bye.
See ya.
Bye now.